Good morning. Today is Thursday, May 14, 2020. I'm Ben Dryden. You're watching DrydenWire Live. A lot to get to with our guest today. Attorney, business owner, former Wisconsin representative, and frequent DrydenWire Live guest, Adam Jarchow, will be joining me in just a minute. I think we're going to be talking about the 7th Congressional District, those results, get his analysis on how that all went. Obviously, Supreme Court ruling yesterday is going to probably dominate most of our time. So if you do have a question for Adam regarding the Supreme Court ruling, if you're a business owner, you're just a resident, it doesn't matter, put those into the comments and we'll make sure that we get to as many of those as we can, depending on how many we get. So actually, let's just get right to it. See if we can get him on here. Please help me welcome back to the show, Mr. Adam Jarchow. Joker, good morning.
Good morning. How's Ben today?
Cautiously optimistic. How's that?
Oh, no reason to be cautious. It feels like freedom today.
Yeah, I figured you're going to be excited today, a little amped up, which is good.
Today is a good day. I tweeted this morning that there are 4 Wisconsinites who woke up this morning getting to know that they freed 6 million Wisconsinites from lockdown. So it's good to be a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, and obviously I don't even know where to start with all that stuff. But before we get into any of that stuff, we do need to talk about, or I do want to talk about, the 7th Congressional election on Tuesday. Obviously, Tiffany won, was it 43%? What were your takeaways from that when you saw that?
So I think Tiffany did kind of what he needed to do. It tells me exactly what the Marquette poll told me earlier in the week, that Wisconsin, once again, is going to be incredibly important in the presidential race. So you might remember when Donald Trump won Wisconsin unexpectedly in 2016, he won the 7th Congressional District by 20 points. Mm-hmm. And so in a special election, you're never going to get quite to that kind of level. And so, first of all, it's important to win the election, but the margin in a district like that, if you're trying to draw some takeaways, matters too. And I think the margin of 14 or 15 points says to us that, kind of the Trump stuff is still pretty strong in northern Wisconsin, and it kind of parallels what the Marquette poll told us earlier. This is going to be a battleground state. I predict that we are going to see a lot of Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Mike Pence and whoever Joe Biden chooses as his running mate. I think we're going to see a lot of those guys in Wisconsin this fall.
Yeah, and a lot of money is going to be pumped into Wisconsin, I would assume, for sure, as well. So when I was looking at the numbers, obviously you just have the overall 57-43 we were just talking about, but then the 26 counties that the 7th Congressional District makes up, either in whole or partly, Ashland, Bayfield, and Douglas went blue, but I don't think anyone was surprised by that. I was a little surprised that of the other 23, not one of them went blue. It was just those 3 counties right next to each other, which, again, I think that kind of makes sense. And granted, this district is a conservative district, so duh. But I don't know, were you as surprised as I was that it was just 3 counties out of the 26?
Yeah, not really. I mean, First of all, Tom ran a good campaign. We're in this weird situation where it's, Tom, his Senate district covers a huge swath of the congressional district. So Tom is a pretty well-known entity out there already. Yeah. At least in a big part of the district, whereas his opponent, I know you don't like me to say that, whereas Zunker,
we forgot her name. Yeah.
Whereas Tricia Zunker, she was new. She's never held public office before outside of the school board, and I think she's on the tribal Supreme Court, so a pretty small area. Mm-hmm. The one thing that to take away from that, though, is we hear a lot about the word gerrymandering, right? And if you think about the assembly districts that are in that congressional district, or the Senate districts that are in that congressional district, it's very hard to imagine how you could draw lines in that area in a way that would make it more kind of competitive for Democrats. When out of 26 counties, the Democrat only wins 3. It makes it very difficult to think about, well, how do you draw those lines in a different way?
Right.
And it also says to me that those races for the 73rd Assembly District and the 74th, that's Nick Milroy up in Superior and Beth Myers in Bayfield, they're going to be really competitive. Both of them have drawn strong Republican candidates for the fall to run against them. And I think those are going to be competitive races this fall. And that's something to watch, because if the Republicans pick up just a couple more seats, they're going to get a super majority, a veto-proof majority in the Assembly.
Well, that wouldn't be good for the current governor.
It would not be. No.
Right. Well, you and I had talked last Wednesday when you were on. And again, we're going to get to all the Supreme Court ruling stuff in just a second. We just wanted to kind of touch on the 7th Congressional District race for anyone that was just joining us. That you had said you felt that Tom Tiffany was going to win, but by not a large margin.
Right.
So because he did, I mean, I guess that's relative large margin, but more than what you and I both kind of thought. You've kind of touched on some of the reasons as to why, but why did you think it was going to be by a little bit, and then obviously what we saw?
Yeah, I think that what happens is in these special elections, you just never know what the turnout's going to be. They're all pretty low turnout. And so if one side or the other has a big sort of spike in turnout and it's not matched by the other side, it really can skew what the normal numbers would be. And I just assumed in a kind of a, off-year election where the president is a Republican, typically that benefits the other party.
Yeah.
And so I thought that would press down the numbers a little bit, but they pressed them down a little bit from 2016, but not nearly as much as I would have thought. So it speaks a lot to I think Tom ran a very strong campaign, did a very nice job during this weird circumstance. So it speaks a lot to his campaign and his ability to connect with people.
Well, because of what you had told me last week, I had said I thought Tricia Zunker was going to win, but just by a little bit. So I was wrong.
Are you blaming you losing a bet on me?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. We have a bet. Oh, no, I wrote something down for that. Yeah, so the bet was that I had to say something nice about you. You asked for a steak, but hold on. So I wrote something down for you. So I lost the bet. You were right.
Is it a haiku?
No, I don't know how to write. I mean, I know what that is, but I don't know how to write one. So I had a hard time coming up with something, my own words to compliment you. So I stole this from someone else.
Oh.
I'm stupid. You're smart. I was wrong. You were right. You're the best. I'm the worst. You're very good looking, and I'm not that attractive.
Is that from Billy Madison?
Bill Shakespeare, I think, wrote that. No, it was, Happy Gilmore, I think. And also, I will get you a steak. Next time you go to the store, now that things are opening up, you go to your local store, you buy a Banquet Salisbury steak TV dinner, send me the bill, and I'll pay for it. And I'll even let you change your title. So when I introduce you right now as attorney, business owner, former Wisconsin representative, and frequent DrydenWire guest, you are now, because you have been right on everything so far, your new title is going to be chief political. Your first job is to come up with a new title for yourself. Something.
I'll let you handle that.
Okay. And if you're wondering if there's a pay, there's just a lot more Salisbury steaks in there. All right, so let's get to, obviously, the stake of this conversation, because it's going off the rails. Supreme Court yesterday came down. First takeaways. As soon as you saw that, obviously it was like 160-some pages of all their opinions, but your first response to it.
So you're going to think this is weird, but my first response was a mixture of happiness and a little bit of disappointment. So the case was a 4-3 ruling, okay? So the majority had 4 votes, and the dissent had 3 votes. There was also concurring opinion. So just as kind of a primer on appellate court decisions, there's usually 3 sections of those opinions. 1 is the majority opinion, 2 is the concurring opinions, and 3 is the dissenting opinions. Mm-hmm. So the only one that actually has sort of the binding effect of law is the majority opinion. The concurring opinions are written by justices for varying reasons. Maybe they want to make a point that's not made in the concurring opinion. Maybe they want to further set out their reasoning. They might want to try to lay the groundwork for future similar cases, some reasoning for those. The dissenting opinions, of course, they want to say why they think the majority was wrong and spell that out that way. So in the majority, there were, it's kind of talked about that right now there's a 5-2 conservative majority on the court.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the 5, kind of normal conservatives on the court voted to uphold the Evers order, and he dissented, Brian Hagedorn. And so the reason for the disappointment was one of the 4 who was in the majority lost in April, Dan Kelly.
Right.
So he's going off the court, going to be replaced by Jill Karofsky, who I think most of us would say is going to be a more liberal-leaning member of the court. Mm-hmm. And so by looking at that, you start to think, boy, if you lose Hagedorn on a lot of these cases, do we really have a conservative-leaning court anymore?
Sure.
So that was one of my disappointments. A lot of us worked really hard to get Brian Hagedorn elected, and then on a big case like this, to see him in the dissenting camp was really disappointing.
And he was recently elected that position, or was he appointed? I can't remember. Was he appointed or elected?
No, he was elected April before last, so he's been on the bench about just under a year.
Sure. So do you think, is there any possibility, because I'm not saying that there's politics in politics, but do you think it may have been, or a possibility, that when they're having these conversations back and forth after they've had their meeting, and it looked clear that this was going to be a, as you said, conservative, but the vote is going to be like a 5-2, do you think there's any possibility that maybe he looked at this and said, I'm going to go the other way just because, right, for something down the road. So now I'm like the X factor. I'm the wild card, and no one can put me in that box of being a conservative judge. Do you think there's any likelihood of that, or he just truly believed what he believed?
Yeah, no, I disagree with him, of course, but I think he's actually a good and honorable man, and he is making these decisions based on what he believes. And of course, it's disappointing to me, but I think that he likely strongly believes that, one, this was not a rule subject to the rulemaking provisions, and that was the primary challenge. And 2, he also held that the legislature didn't have standing. He didn't hold. His view was that the legislature didn't have standing to bring the claim that the secretary exceeded her statutory authority. So I think he honestly believes those things. There's going to be a lot of analysis over the next week or two of not only the majority opinion, but some of the concurring opinions, and certainly the dissenting opinion. And it's really important to try to unpack his dissent because in August, when Dan Kelly goes off the court and Karofsky comes on, you can imagine a scenario where DHS promulgates this rule again, or this order again, and says, we're going to do this. And now all of a sudden there's not necessarily a majority. So somehow there needs to be some understanding of where he was coming from and whether there's any opening for a challenge, or whether, that the sort of governor and DHS have unfettered authority here.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be very interesting to see the analyses of his dissenting opinion.
I've seen a lot of people commenting either on Facebook or in news articles that I've been reading early this morning that were saying that this was a clear partisan thing, even though, granted, they're not partisan, but as you had mentioned, conservative or liberal. But that does not also mean, though, that the two that we assume are liberals, or we kind of put in that category, they also voted the way that a lot of Democrats thought they were going to. So doesn't it kind of go both ways?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't have kind of a partisan breakdown without having some on both sides. So, as surprising or disappointing, however you want to put it, it was to some conservatives that Justice Hagedorn went to the dissenting side. Just imagine if one of the two, quote unquote, more liberal justices would have voted with the majority. I think you'd see a lot of, liberals, or whatever you want to call them. I kind of hate those words when you're talking about judges, but it's the best words we have. Yeah. So just imagine that they would have done that on the other side, or gone the other way, the disappointment that would have been on that side. So I do think that we overdo it by calling courts partisan and thinking that there's always a partisan breakdown. I mean, they certainly have their philosophical leanings, but I really believe most of the time they do this on a case-by-case basis.
There's a lot of confusion after this came out. There were news articles that were
sure.
Even people that I have a lot of respect for, that they're saying that, well, there's still 6 days. Right. We had Robin Voss on, I think last Friday, and he had talked about, and you were on a couple days earlier, and explaining, so what happens after this? So when this comes down, and you called it, you said it's going to get, well, I think you had said probably the 5-2, but it's 4-3, but you called it, and then you kind of walked through what's next, and Robin Voss walked through what's next. This didn't really seem to, and obviously it was like 160-some pages, and I was like just kind of skimming through the first parts trying to find something. That's a lot to read. But there were, it seems like, two sides. So can you get into that? Why is there some confusion about this 6 days?
Yeah. So it goes back to what we started with. So there's a majority opinion, and that is the only binding provision of the entire 160 pages. So the majority opinion probably takes up 15, 20 pages of the 160. And that is the only binding part of an opinion. Then there's a concurring opinion, or in this case, multiple concurring opinions, and then there's dissenting opinions. So what made it so confusing was the majority opinion was written by Justice Roggensack, the Chief Justice. She had the 4 votes, her and 3 other justices, and they very clearly, in the majority opinion, decided not to issue the 6-day stay. Very clearly said, we think that this case was filed 2 weeks ago, and we assume that the legislature and the governor have been working together. A faulty assumption, I think, that we can get into, but we assume they've been working together, and they can put in place something going forward. We're not going to issue that 6-day stay. The order is struck down. Period, paragraph, that's it. What made it confusing is immediately after that, Justice Roggensack, who wrote the majority opinion, also wrote a concurring opinion. And in her concurring opinion, she said, I would have granted the legislature's request for the 6-day stay. And so people read that concurring opinion because I think it was by the same justice who wrote the majority opinion, and were confused. And one of the bad parts of our media is they put speed over accuracy a lot of times. They want to be the first one out and the first one on the air. And so we saw on the Twin Cities media, and that's what we get in where I live, reports that it was ineffective for the next 6 days. It didn't go into effect until May 20th. Yeah. And so people were incredibly confused. I think one of the counties even put something out on their Facebook page saying there's a stay until May 20th. Yeah. And so people were very confused. And I actually had a nice young lady on my Facebook page last night call me dumb and uneducated because I said, no, there's no stay.
What? On Facebook? Come on. That never happens.
Yeah, she said, you're dumb and uneducated. You should learn how to read.
Well, it's funny because actually...
I just said, well, you see... Go ahead.
No, please, continue.
I just told her, you seem very nice. I appreciate your spunk.
Your spunk. Nice. No, I literally, when I got it, so I, had the picture of the Supreme Court, and then I literally just put in the document just so I could have it up. So you were right, speed. Yeah. And that was true for us too. But I didn't write anything. I'm like, this is what they said, and this is what the order was. But if you want to read it, there's 161 pages. So while I was starting to read through all of this, that's actually when I actually text you. And I'm like, help me understand some of this. And then you kind of walked me through a little bit of it. I talked to a couple others just to make sure I had some good understanding of kind of what it was, because that's when I started seeing all these reports about that it is 6 days. And it got so confusing so fast. Now, county health, each county, they still, I think it's the health departments or the public health for each county, they still have something to say about this, correct?
So under Chapter 252, which is the chapter that DHS had originally acted under, there is a provision that allows for county health departments to issue some orders. I think it's very unclear the extent to which they have that authority. And in fact, I saw an email from late last night from the Department of Justice, the Wisconsin Department of Justice, saying, one, nobody can be arrested for violating the order anymore, right? Because the order is gone. And two, we're not yet ready to take a position on the local health department's authority. So in probably 68 of the 72 counties, there is no local health department order. So right now, I think Brown County has one, Dane County
yep,
has one, Milwaukee County might have one, but nowhere around here has one.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at least at the moment, no counties around here are under local health department restrictions either. I won't be surprised if some try to do that. And I also won't be surprised to see an immediate challenge to it. And I think there's a very strong case to be made that if the state DHS doesn't have the authority, then maybe the locals don't have the authority either. But that's, that's the thing about court rulings is you can only sort of glean principles from those rulings, but you don't know exactly how the next case will go.
Matt Kirkpatrick just had commented and said Rock County as well. I don't know where that is, but
okay, yep.
I have no clue. I'm assuming down south.
It is, yep.
Oh, so what other takeaways did you get from this Supreme Court ruling yesterday?
Yeah, I think a couple of the things that were really interesting to me, and it kind of gets in the weeds, but Justice Bradley wrote a concurring opinion, and she was pretty outspoken at the oral arguments about the constitutionality of this thing, and whether that even if the statute authorized the secretary to take this power, her point in the oral arguments and then in very strong language in the concurring opinions was the Constitution doesn't allow these sort of things to happen. The Constitution doesn't allow, one individual, whether it's the secretary or the governor, to, by the stroke of a pen, tell 6 million people you have to stay home, you have to close your businesses, and you can't travel. And she wrote some very strong language. And in fact, I hope this isn't indicative of a big split in kind of the conservative part of the court, but her and Justice Kelly wrote a footnote that really took to task Justice Hagedorn's dissent and the reasoning behind the dissent. So it was very strong language, and you don't see that very often in these kind of opinions.
Yeah. Again, I was reading, I think I fell asleep around midnight last night, reading through. I printed out, I think I went through a whole ream of paper, just printing out all this, and I was starting to read through it, and I asked my wife, because she kind of knows a little bit about this world, and we're just kind of going through it, and I was trying to break it down, and I think after like 30 minutes, I just want to, put a shotgun in my mouth. I just couldn't. There's so much to it, right? There just absolutely is. Before we go any further, I want to stop in. We have a question. Excuse me. This is from Joey. Adam, we're getting questions from salons, hairs and nails, about insurance and licensing. Can you address that?
Yeah, for sure. So that was one of the big issues that people had talked about while the order was in effect. People were concerned that if you say you lived in Polk County, or now this week Barron County or Burnett County, you were one of those counties where, your local government board or sheriff had said, I'm not going to enforce the order anymore. People were concerned that either their licenses could get revoked, or if they operated kind of in contravention of the order, that they wouldn't be insured if something were to happen. And I think those concerns were somewhat overblown, but at least reasonable at the time that the order was in effect. At this point, it is as though order number 28, which was the stay-at-home order, it is as though it never happened. And so people are operating today just like they were operating the day before the stay-at-home order first took effect.
Okay.
And so it's out the door, so there should be zero concern about your licensing or your insurance. Now, that certainly doesn't mean that you're home free or you're scot-free as a business owner. You always have a duty of care as just an individual under tort law. And so if you are not doing some of these things that have been recommended, trying to follow the guidelines, and I think you should try to follow guidelines, and I mean social distancing, hand sanitizer, hand washing, those sort of things. If you're not following those guidelines and somebody were to get sick in your establishment, there is some possibility that a tort claim could possibly be brought. Now, you have insurance for that, or you should. That said, you don't want to go through that situation. So, my very strong recommendation and what I have been kind of preaching for 60 days, Ben, is we can do this. Businesses can do this. We can operate in a way that protects customers and protects people's health without the shutdown. And my hope is that, people in the business community will prove me right, that they will operate in a safe manner. Even today, I stopped on my way to get coffee, and they at the gas station, and they don't let you get your own coffee anymore.
Yeah,
right?
I know, it's so bizarre.
Well, even today, they still didn't let me get my own coffee. So and maybe it's just because it's so new, but I think there's I think there's going to be some residual safeguards that remain,
fine.
and I think
Right.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I know my brother's
And
opening.
I think if you want to wear a mask or you want to wear gloves or whatever makes you feel safe,
Yeah.
I think you ought to do that.
Yeah. So we have another question here from this one is from Todd. Can Adam touch on what this means to schools going forward? I don't know if there's something that you could address.
Yeah, no, the order did. There was one exception to the court's order, and that was schools. So it provides that DHS still has the authority. So as far as I know, schools will continue to be closed through the end of this year. I think it remains to be seen what will happen next year. But I think the court has allowed for that to continue for the future, anyways. Now, what would be interesting if a private school brought some sort of case, because clearly the government runs government schools, right? Your local, school district is run by the government, and there's all kinds of authority there. So that's different from a constitutional and statutory perspective. I think they're different animals than a private business or a private school. So I could see some ability if, let's just say, the governor said, yep, we're not going to have school in the fall either. I could see some ability of, for example, a private school to be able to challenge this and maybe find some success.
Okay, and here's another question, and I didn't even think about this. This is from Josh. Could Evers wait a day and then initiate another order for 60 days?
Yeah, so two things. One, I don't think so, and I'll talk about that in a second. And two, I don't think it would matter because, remember, the stay-at-home order wasn't actually under Governor Evers' emergency authority. It was under the first stay-at-home order that was when it was Order 12, I think it was called then, the first stay-at-home. But when he extended the stay-at-home, he didn't even do it. Andrea Palm, the DHS secretary, did it under her 252 authority, or what she thought was her 252 authority. And so I don't think that is a likely scenario. And I think the court would, one, not view that favorably, and two, keep in mind, under the governor's authority, the legislature has the right to immediately revoke that authority. And I think in this case, the legislature probably would do that if the governor tried to declare a state of emergency again.
And how long?
Because and I think the governor, one last point, I think the governor earlier this week conceded that he doesn't have the authority to do that because he sent the legislature a request to extend his 60 days, and the legislature declined to do that.
Is there any scenario where he'd be able to? I mean, that first one that was shorter. Do you think that maybe technically you could, but as you're just talking about, there's a lot of variables here. Do you think there's any likelihood? So now it's not about could he or should he? Will he? Do you think he will do anything here?
Well, he is already, yes. So what they will do is go through the rulemaking process, and that's the process that the legislature argued in the court that he should have to go through. It's the process that the legislature wanted the governor to go through all along because it gives the legislature some input. So my understanding is today the governor will issue a scope statement, and that is the first step in the emergency rulemaking process. And it takes about 12 days or so to get an emergency rule online. And then once it sort of becomes effective, at that point, there's a committee in the legislature called the Joint Committee on Administrative Rule Review. We call it JCRER. So JCRER has a right to then review that rule and suspend that rule if it wants. So the thinking is because the governor knows that the Republicans control JCRER, that he won't promulgate a rule that they're likely to kick out, right? So the thinking has been that he would negotiate now with Robin Vos and Scott Fitzgerald on a rule that JCRER could live with. Now, who knows if that's actually true? I've been saying for as long as I've been coming on your show, Ben, I think they should work together.
Yep.
And I think that's what Robin Voss said last week, that they'd like to work
Yep.
together.
Yep.
Um, will they actually work together? I don't know.
I don't know.
It will be interesting to see how that goes.
Didn't Romaine Quinn, didn't he just get, I thought I saw something like a week ago. I thought he just got appointed to that JCRAR.
He did.
So
Romaine had asked Robin here a few weeks ago when this court case was filed and it became apparent that this was a possibility that JCRAR would have a right to weigh in on this. He said, I want Northwestern Wisconsin to have a voice on this. I think that regional reopening makes sense. We don't have very many cases in our part of the state. I want a voice for Northwestern Wisconsin. And so Robin actually did put him on JCRAR. Nice. And so Romaine's going to have a say in this.
Oh, I should have him on soon. Here's a question from Liz. Adam, what did you drink and how quickly after the ruling to celebrate last night, since you were one of the lawyers with a case? You don't have to answer that one.
I will admit that I went out and had a few beers and had a few toasts, and we had a nice time. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I've kind of come to realize through this process is that these small businesses, whether it's a bar or restaurant or photography studio or what have you, cafe, bakery, donut shop, coffee shop, these are the fabric of our community. This is where people go to meet. It's not about, necessarily going out to, get drunk or have dinner. It's about community and meeting with your friends and seeing your friends. And what I saw last night were friends that hadn't seen each other for a couple of months and literally saw tears. And I know you're not supposed to hug because of the social distancing thing, but I saw people hugging, and it was a celebratory mood among people. And it really it was touching to me to see that. And it was probably more touching because I was drinking, but I saw a friend of mine posted a picture of him holding PBR. If you've ever seen the PBR can, right? It's red, white, and blue. And all he said was freedom.
Oh, well, I think a lot of people. So this is what I'm really excited for. Or this is where when you first asked me when you came on this morning how I was doing, I said I'm cautiously optimistic. And it's about this, that a lot of people have been saying since the Safer at Home and then the regional opening, that discussion came up, and looking just at our area, Northwest Wisconsin, that we know how to be neighbors. We know how to take care of each other. We all have our strong opinions, but there is something awesome about this rural area. Mm-hmm. It's like have you ever gone to an intersection where there's, the stoplights and everything, and then the power goes out, so it's just flashing yellow or flashing red, or let's just say they're not even working. Why don't you see any crashes? Because everyone's going, wait, slow down. What's going on? Let's be extra careful. I'm really looking forward to seeing how we handle this, since this is now a whole Wisconsin thing, not a regional opening. It's all Wisconsin. How Northwest Wisconsin, how we are as communities, and how we are approaching this and how we're doing it. Our businesses opening up and just saying F it and like nothing ever happened? Or are some of these still going to go, let's be careful still? Let's have some things put in place just for safety. Let's take care of each other. I'm hoping that's what's going to happen. I don't know if it will. I think it will. I think it's more likely in our area than probably anywhere else. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it'll be a mixed bag. I think there will be some out there that, don't necessarily follow the rules or the guidelines. In fact, I saw kind of an unfortunate video already on social media from a bar near UW-Platteville, and there was a bunch of young people, and they were kind of crowded into the bar.
Yeah.
And, that kind of plays into this idea that, they're not going to be responsible. On the other hand, there's literally been like 0 people under 30 that have died from this in Wisconsin, and very few even in across the country. And it's not to say that people haven't gotten sick. So I think young people in particular can make the case that, at least as to them, they're unlikely to become seriously ill from this. Now, they can be carriers and infect their parents and grandparents, and that's certainly a concern. But I do think and hope that the vast majority of businesses and individuals will do the right thing. I was just talking to my wife this morning about the restaurant that she runs and what her plan is. And she has a huge restaurant with a restaurant side and a banquet center.
Is that Brow Time?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think at Browtine, she's going to open the banquet center side for restaurant service because it's so big, you can really space the tables out there.
Nice.
And of course, all of the banquets have gotten canceled anyway. So I think she feels like that's a good way to be able to be responsible and to keep people separated, but still be open.
Yeah. Hey, Matt Kirkpatrick had a question. I have no idea what he's talking. Well, maybe actually. Any ideas? Or I'm sorry. Any updates on your case involving attorney dues in Wisconsin?
Oh, yes. Actually, there is an update. This was
Is that the
so,
thing that I emailed you this morning about?
yeah. So
Okay, so we'll get into that in a little bit. So Matt, keep paying attention. We'll
okay.
get into that. I want to finish this because I emailed you, and first of all, it's just kind of a funny story. But let's get to that in a little bit. Let's go back to again, stay on Supreme Court stuff. So walk people through right now what you think is going to. You've talked about this, but put it in a bullet point version for those who are just kind of joining. What's going to happen next? What should people be doing right now?
If you're a business owner, you are free to open if you want. You don't have to, but you're free to if you want. Sorry, did I get cut off there?
Yeah, just for a second. That's right.
Yeah. So you can open, and I would suggest you follow the guidelines. Show that we can be responsible business owners. And the only caveat to that is watch your local health officials. Watch to see if you're a business in St. Croix County, watch to see if your county health official issues some order that's similar to the stay-at-home order. And at least until that gets challenged in a court and overturned, if a local official would issue such an order, I would suggest that you consider abiding by it. I'll leave people to make their individual decisions on how they want to deal with that. But up until that would happen, you're free to operate exactly how you want. The other thing to do is watch the rule-making process that's starting today with the scope statement. Be in contact with your legislators. They are the ones that are ultimately going to decide how this rule would look. And I think there will be some appetite in the legislature to have kind of a compromise type deal with the governor. And just make sure that you're talking to your legislators about how that would impact your business and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and that you have a voice in that rulemaking process. But pay attention to that. And then the final thing I would say is pay attention to what happens at the end of the summer when Dan Kelly is not on the court and there's this sort of different majority, and sort of watch for this to flare back up in the fall. Not necessarily the COVID, but the legal wrangling over this to flare back up this fall.
All right, so I want to first of all, thank you for all that insight, man. You're awesome. Giving all those things. So Matt Kirkpatrick had asked earlier about, we're going to find it again, and the reason I brought that up or put it on there it is again, any updates on your case involving attorney dues in Wisconsin. So my alarm's set for 3:55 every morning. Gives me 5 minutes to make coffee, turn on the overnight news, and start work. Well, I got up a little early this morning, just randomly, so it was a little after 3:30. And one of the first things I do is I do emails because it's a kind of a private time. It's no phone calls, no anything, and I get 100, 150 emails a day. So that's when I do them in the morning. Well, I Googled your name, Adam Jarchow, because I knew you were coming on the show, just in case, looking for local news or anything that you have said recently, so I could, totally hammer you with it. But I couldn't find anything. But I did see, I did see this thing from Wall Street Journal. It was in the editorial board. It said the headline was "The Supreme Court and the Lawyers Guilds," and it's one of those like a lot of papers do, or online, like the legacy papers where they have online stuff. They still want to make money, so you can read like a paragraph and you got to pay to read the rest. So I'm like, screw it. But I emailed that to you at like 3:45, 3:50 this morning, and asking you, what is this about? You're in the Wall Street Journal. Like, your name was brought up there and everything. And then 5 minutes later, at like 3:56, you're responding. First of all, what are you doing? Were you did you not go to bed yet, or were you already up?
Yeah, I don't sleep very well, so I was up.
So is that what this is
my
about?
wife's chagrin. Yeah, so a number of months ago, another Wisconsin lawyer and I sued the Wisconsin bar,
attaboy,
claiming that their sort of regime where we have to be members and pay dues is unconstitutional under a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling. And that case has now reached the United States Supreme Court. And they were going to have the conference on whether to accept the case this week, but they've pushed it back to next week. And just reading the tea leaves, we think that means that the court, which gets thousands of petitions to take cases each year, right? And they only take about 70 of them. So we think what that meant, that they're pushing it back, the conference on our case, is that somebody's paying attention and that they may accept our case. And part of that was because there was a Wall Street Journal editorial, and that's not very often, where the Wall Street Journal editorializes and says the Supreme Court really should take this case. It's an important next step.
Wow.
And that was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday.
Well, it was neat seeing your name on there. That's all. That was cool.
Yeah, it is kind of weird to see your name in the Wall Street Journal.
I know, it's just bizarre. And like a couple nights on Monday night,
Right.
I get a text at 6. Monday night must have been 6:10, and I get a text from someone I knew that said, "Call this number at 6:15." I'm like, "What's this about?" Didn't say. They didn't respond. So I call in at 6:15. I'm on hold. I'm assuming a whole bunch of people were, but all of a sudden I hear Tom Tiffany, now Congressman-elect Tom Tiffany, saying, "Hey, everyone, welcome to this call, and thanks for whatever." I don't know. And then he said, "Now here's President Trump." And I'm like, "What?" So I'm like, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, I don't care. It was just really bizarre. I'm sitting here listening on my speakerphone to President Trump talking about Tom Tiffany in the 7th District and all the things he was doing. I felt like I was getting inside info. And then Sean Duffy was on the call. The whole thing was really bizarre, but I don't know. It's kind of cool. That's all. It's kind of cool.
Well, I tweeted, I think it was on Election Day, President Trump and Vice President Pence had been tweeting about Tom and go vote. And regardless of what you think about that election, and maybe you don't like Senator Tiffany, whatever, or Congressman-elect Tiffany now, he grew up on a dairy farm in Elmwood. I mean, he literally shoveled cow manure like so many farm kids did. And it just speaks to just the awesomeness of this country that a guy that grew up shoveling cow manure in Elmwood can rise to be a member of Congress and to have the president and the vice president, encouraging people to go vote for him. It's just an awesome country. And, this last 60 days for me has been disheartening because I felt some of that slip away. And I know people will disagree with me, but I felt like this is not the way it's supposed to work. This is not, one person should not have the power to do this. And that's really kind of, gotten to me a little bit. But to see that happening with Senator Tiffany, and to see the case, the checks and balances that came from the case yesterday, to see the local sheriffs providing some check and balance, it just reiterated to me that we are an incredibly strong country foundationally. And we're very, very lucky to live here. You
have said since we first started doing these that what needs to happen is Evers and his administration and his team needs to sit down with GOP leadership. Until they do that, no one's going to win when this is finished. Not Republicans, not Democrats, and not Wisconsinites. No one's going to win from this. Because, I'm sorry, some people may, but it'll harm a whole bunch of others. The point is, there won't be something that will be an amicable, an agreement, okay, we'll compromise. He said if they keep doing it this way and they don't sit down and talk, which they haven't. I mean, I guess they technically had a phone call, but I don't think that really went very well. It's not going to end the way that you probably want it, or maybe it will, and maybe that's going to be bad, actually. It's kind of like just having if you can't sort it out, go to your parents, and it's like, okay, if you guys can't figure it out, I'll make the decision, but you're not going to like it, neither of you.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where we are right now, because great, I'm so happy that businesses, and hopefully they're going to use some, common sense. They're going to, as you mentioned earlier, take some protective precautions, or at least having options for those things. Be smart about how you're doing this. But looking back at everything that you have said since day one, it's just so disappointing that they can never do that. It's so disappointing. We should not have the Supreme Court having to make a ruling on this. It's ridiculous that it got this far.
Yeah, it really is, and it speaks to this partisan divide, because as soon as I say, boy, I wish the governor would have taken the lead to meet with Robin and Fitz, 50% of the state will say, no, that's not his fault. It's their fault.
Yeah.
and then the other 50% of the state will say, no, it's not their fault. It's Governor Evers' fault. Well, guess what? As a business owner, I tell my staff, I don't care whose fault it is.
Nope.
I just want a solution, right? Let's just fix this. Get together, sit in the room, lock yourselves in there, and come up with a dang solution. And, it's not too late, actually, to do that, and I hope they do. But every day that goes by, it becomes more and more unlikely, I think.
Well, everyone really should absolutely stay safe. And for a lot of people, we're talking about businesses, how they're opening and what precautions, if any, they're going to be taking or if they should. But also just as a citizen, if you're going somewhere and you don't want, and you still have some concerns, and if you're a resident in a community and you go by a store and there's a whole bunch of people, just don't go in. Like you have that right to still not go there. But I think just everyone, let's use some caution. I just really hope that this is going to be a, fireworks. Oh, we're just going back to normal today, because that's dangerous too. Let's just be smart and let's be careful, right?
For sure. And, what I'm saying to business owners is don't give them a reason. Don't give them a reason to pass a local order. Don't give them a reason for the state to get involved again. Our livelihoods as business owners are on the line, so do the right thing.
Adam, you're awesome, man. Thanks so much for being here. I absolutely love it. Your insight, your opinions, I appreciate. I know may not everyone likes them, but I do. The fact that you will own your opinions, I appreciate that. A lot of people just don't want to do that. I appreciate it. Thanks so much, man. We'll talk soon.
Hey, have a great day.
All right, cool. Special thank you to my guest today, attorney, business owner, former Wisconsin representative, and DrydenWire chief legal something. I don't know. Adam Jarchow was my guest. Thank you all for watching. And on a quick side note, thank you to all of you that have watched all of our live chats during the Safer at Home order. Not really sure what our plan is going forward regarding the frequency of our live shows, but it has been an absolute pleasure to speak to all of our guests over the last 7 weeks. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed doing them. Things are changing rapidly, but as always, stay safe, use good judgment, and have a blessed day.